You probably know Canada for its mountains, its endless forests, its reputation for being polite and predictable and safe. But there is another Canada, one that does not make the postcards. A Canada of places so remote, so strange, or so deliberately hidden that the satellites either cannot explain them or are not allowed to show them. There is a giant human face staring up out of the Alberta badlands that nobody carved. There is a thin ribbon of sand in the Atlantic that has swallowed more than 350 ships. There is a town up north that was wiped off the map so completely that only its empty streets remain, curving through the bush with no houses left to connect. There is a valley where the men who went looking for gold kept turning up without their heads. And there is a patch of ground holding enough poison to kill every person on Earth several times over, sitting inside a city of 20,000 people. In this video, we are counting down 20 places in Canada you should not search for on Google Earth. And trust me, you will want to stay until the end, because number 1 is not a legend or a rumor. It is real, it is documented, and it is still there. So hit subscribe and let's begin number 20. If you set your map down over the dry, eroded badlands of southeastern Alberta, near the Saskatchewan border, you will eventually pass over something that stops you cold. From directly above, the land forms the shape of a human face, a man in a feathered headdress, eyes closed, looking up at the sky. It is called the Badlands Guardian, and it is not carved, not built, not man-made at all. It is simply what happens when wind and a few thousand years of rain cut through soft clay in exactly the wrong way. The face was only noticed in 2005, when a woman scrolling through satellite imagery spotted it and could not unsee it. Look closer and the figure even seems to be wearing an earbud, a thin white cord running to one ear, though that part is just a road, built to service an oil well, that happened to land in precisely the right spot. Nothing about the Badlands Guardian is supernatural. And yet people return to those coordinates again and again because there is something deeply unsettling about a face that sighs, staring upward, that no one designed and no one can erase. Number 19. Now move your map to central Quebec into a vast stretch of boreal forest and look for a ring. Not a lake shaped vaguely round, a ring, a near-perfect circle of water roughly 70 kilometers across, so large and so regular that astronauts photograph it from orbit and call it the Eye of Quebec. Its real name is the Manicouagan crater. About 214 million years ago, near the end of the Triassic, an asteroid several kilometers wide struck the planet here at tens of thousands of kilometers an hour. Glaciers and erosion ground the crater down over the eons, but a ring of harder rock survived, and water eventually filled the low ground around it. Here is the strange part. The perfect circle you see today is not ancient at all. Until the late 1960s, there were only 2 crescent-shaped lakes curving along the crater's edges. It was a hydroelectric dam, finished in 1968, that flooded them into one continuous ring, and the reservoir did not finish filling until around 1977. So the oldest scar on this part of the map, older than the dinosaurs that came after it, only took its familiar shape within living memory. Number 18. About 300 kilometers off the coast of Nova Scotia, alone in the open Atlantic, there is a thin crescent of sand. It is roughly 42 kilometers long and at its widest, barely 1.5 kilometers across, rising only a few meters above the waves. This is Sable Island, and for centuries sailors had another name for it, the graveyard of the Atlantic. More than 350 shipwrecks have been recorded here since 1583. The island sits directly on the old shipping route between North America and Europe, in a place where the cold Labrador Current collides with the warm Gulf Stream and wraps everything in dense, blinding fog. Before satellite navigation, captains working by dead reckoning would simply sail into it by mistake. The island itself barely holds still. The wind shifts its sand constantly, so that it is charted on every map but never quite fixed in place. And then there are the horses. Somewhere between 300 and 500 wild horses live on Sable Island, descended from animals left there in the 1700s, the only land mammal to survive on that bare sandbar. In 1959, the government planned to remove them. A flood of letters from schoolchildren stopped it, and their protection was eventually written into law. Today the island is a national park with a handful of staff, the horses, the fog, and the bones of 350 ships somewhere underneath the sand. Number 17. Stay on the map in central British Columbia and look at the coast, the part of it tangled into the fjords of the Great Bear Rainforest, reachable only by boat or by float plane. There you will find a town called Ocean Falls. It was built around a pulp mill in the early 1900s, in a place so wet that its residents called themselves the Rain People. It receives well over 4 meters of rain a year. At its peak in the 1950s and 60s, around 3,500 people lived there, with a hospital, a hotel, a bowling alley, and an enormous swimming pool. That pool produced something remarkable. A tiny rain-soaked town in the middle of nowhere trained competitive swimmers good enough to send several to the Olympics. Then the mill closed in the 1970s, most of the residents left, and many of the buildings were bulldozed, the pool included. What remains is the strangest part. The Martin Inn, once one of the largest hotels in the province, still stands on the waterfront, a hollow concrete shell with the rainforest growing in through its windows. Only a few dozen people live in Ocean Falls now, in a town being slowly patiently pulled apart by moss and rain. Number 16. There is a small clearing in the southwest corner of the Yukon, just off the Alaska Highway, that looks like nothing at all from above. A faint scar of old runway, a few overgrown rectangles where buildings used to stand. This is Snag, and on the morning of February 3, 1947, it became the coldest place ever recorded on the North American continent. Snag was never really a town. It was a wartime airstrip and weather station, home to a handful of First Nations families and trappers, and a rotating crew of airmen and meteorologists. But that winter, a dome of Arctic air settled over the Yukon and would not move. The temperature fell and kept falling until it dropped past the lowest mark on the thermometer itself. The weather observer had to scratch a new line into the glass with a pair of dividers just to record it. When the instrument was later tested in a lab, the reading came back at -81.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The men said the cold did strange things. Breath froze and fell to the ground with a faint hiss. Sound carried so cleanly that they could hear people talking in the village 4 miles away, as if they were standing in the next room. The airfield closed for good decades ago. Today, Snag is empty, one collapsing log structure, an airstrip slowly being swallowed by poplar saplings, and a record that has stood, unbeaten for nearly 80 years. Number 15. Far up the north coast of British Columbia, in a place with no road in, only a boat or a float plane will get you there, sit the remains of a town called Aniaks. The name comes from a Nisga'a word meaning hidden waters. It was built in 1912 by a mining company around a rich seam of copper, and by 1914 nearly 3,000 people lived there. A smelter, a hospital, a golf course, a curling rink, and one of the most advanced hydroelectric dams of its day. It was not a gentle place to live. The smelter fumes killed the vegetation for miles, and residents learned to plan their laundry day around the direction of the wind to keep the black soot off the wash. Then the Great Depression collapsed the price of copper. By 1935, around 50 million kilograms of unsold copper sat stacked at the harbor, and the mine simply shut down. The town was abandoned. Salvage crews stripped out the steel and machinery for the war effort. And then, in the 1940s, lightning-strike forest fires swept through what was left and burned the wooden town to nothing. What you can see from above today is only the part that could not burn, vast concrete skeletons of the powerhouse and the smelter, a 100-year-old surge tank, all of it with a wet coastal forest, growing straight up through the middle. Number 14. Stay in the far northwest, but cross into Saskatchewan all the way to its northern edge, a place with no permanent road, reachable in winter only by an ice road across a frozen lake. Here you will find Uranium City. It was built in 1952 deliberately as a model town to serve the uranium mines that fed the Cold War. It had paved roads, a hospital, schools, infrastructure laid out for 5,000 people, and by 1981 a population of around 2,500. Then, on December 3rd of that year, a man flew in on a corporate jet and announced that the main mine would close. Within 6 months, 90% of the town was gone. The high school, named, fittingly, after a nuclear reactor, had opened in 1979 and closed in 1983, used for barely 3 years. And here is the detail that stays with you. Crushed rock left over from processing the uranium ore was used as fill material in the foundations of some of the town's schools and homes. Around 70 to 100 people still live in Uranium City today, scattered among the empty apartment blocks and the boarded-up houses, in a town that was built for a future that lasted 30 years. Number 13. About 90 kilometers east of Hay River, in the Northwest Territories, there is a place where the roads still exist, but the town does not. From above you can see it clearly. A neat grid of streets, cul-de-sac sidewalks, even the faint outline of a parking lot, and not a single building. This was Pine Point. For a little under 30 years, it was a real town, and by all accounts a good one, built in the early 1960s around one of the richest lead and zinc deposits in the country. At its peak, it held almost 2,000 people. It had 2 schools, a curling rink, an arena, a golf course, and rows of tidy family homes. People who grew up there still describe it as the best place they ever lived. But a company town lives and dies with its company, and when the price of zinc slipped and the mine flooded, by 1988 it had closed. What happened next is the part that stays with you. The buildings were not just abandoned, they were sold off, hauled away, or flattened. The company erased the town on purpose, partly so that no one could drift in and squat in what was left. And Pine Point became something stranger than a ghost town, a town with no ghosts, no walls, no roofs. Just pavement and speed bumps and the bush growing up through the cracks where the houses used to be. Number 12. Now go to Quebec, to the Saguenay region, and look for a town called Saint-Jean-Vianney. You will not find it, not really. You will find a wide scooped-out crater in the ground and the faint traces of streets that simply stop at its edge. For decades, this was an ordinary village of about 1,200 people. What none of them knew was that their town had been built on a bed of what geologists call Leda clay, or quick clay, a kind of soil that looks solid for generations and then, under enough water, can turn abruptly to liquid. In the weeks before the disaster, there were warnings nobody could read, cracks opening in the streets, house foundations sinking a few inches, strange noises underground. Then, on the night of May 4th, 1971, during a hockey game that had much of the town awake, the ground simply gave way. In moments, roughly 40 homes and the cars and the people in them slid into a pit some 30 meters deep, and the liquefied earth flowed away toward the river. 31 people were killed. Many were never recovered. The government declared the site permanently unsafe and relocated everyone who was left. The land where St. Jean Vianney stood has been empty ever since, because the same thing could happen again and there is no way to make the ground trustworthy. Number 11. Far up the north coast of British Columbia, at the end of a long ocean inlet and a longer gravel road, there is a town that looks, from above, completely ordinary. 90-some houses. Apartment blocks, a shopping center, a hospital, a swimming pool, streets lined with trimmed trees and mowed lawns. The only thing missing when you zoom in is people. This is Kitsault. It was built in 1979, fast by a mining company that wanted molybdenum out of the surrounding mountains, and it was meant to hold 1,200 residents in something close to comfort. Families moved in. A school opened, and then roughly 18 months later, the price of molybdenum collapsed, the mine shut down, and everyone left. The last 2 residents drove out in November of 1983, but here is what makes Kitsault different from every other ghost town on this list: the lights never went off. A series of owners kept the power running and the buildings heated, and a caretaker stayed behind to mow those lawns. Walk into the hospital today and you will find magazines in the waiting room from the early 80s, and IV bags with expiry dates from 1983. It is not decaying. It is waiting, a whole community holding its breath behind a locked gate for residents who are never coming back. If you are finding this journey across Canada's hidden corners as fascinating as I do, take a quick second to hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you would think. And if you know someone who loves maps, mysteries, or the far north, send this their way. Now, let's get back to the countdown, because the last 10 are where this gets strange. Number 10. In southeastern Alberta, between Medicine Hat and the Saskatchewan border, there is an enormous rectangle of empty prairie. Nearly 2,700 square kilometers of it, more than twice the size of New York City. From above, it looks like nothing: open grassland, a few tracks, a small village. This is CFB Suffield, and it is one of the most restricted pieces of ground in the country. Public access to large parts of it is prohibited outright by the National Defense Act. It began in 1941 when Britain needed somewhere far from the war to carry out chemical warfare experiments, and the Canadian government expropriated the land and moved the farmers off. It has been a weapon site ever since, the largest live-fire military training area in Canada, where tank battle groups maneuver, and where every year Allied forces still run training in chemical and biological agents. And here is the quiet irony of the place. Because the land was sealed off from farming and development for 80 years, it accidentally became one of the last great stretches of untouched native prairie left in Canada, so ecologically valuable that part of it is now a protected national wildlife area, a landscape preserved precisely because it was set aside for war. Number 9. Now point your map at the very top of the country, past the mainland, past Baffin Island, all the way to the northern tip of Ellesmere Island, less than 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole. There, in a place where the sun does not rise for 4.5 months of the year, you will find a small cluster of buildings called Alert. It is the northernmost continuously inhabited place on Earth, and officially no one lives there. Alert began in 1950 as a weather station, but its real purpose arrived in 1958, when it became a signals intelligence post, a listening station. During the Cold War, its position was extraordinary. It sat closer to Moscow than to Ottawa, close enough to quietly pull Soviet radio traffic out of the air, tracking missile tests and submarine movements from the top of the world. At its peak, a couple hundred people were stationed there. Today, only a few dozen remain, rotating through on tours measured in months, because no one is allowed to truly settle there. The census records its permanent population as 0. You can find Alert on a satellite map easily enough. What you will notice is that the antennas on the main building are never shown in detail. The Department of National Defense does not allow close photographs of them. It is a place that exists specifically to listen to everyone else, sitting in the dark at the edge of the map, keeping its own picture deliberately blurred. Number 8. On the Arctic coastline of the Northwest Territories, on a remote stretch near Cape Bathurst, there is a place where the cliffs themselves are on fire, and have been on and off for centuries. They are called the Smoking Hills. When the explorer Robert McClure's crew passed this coast in the 1850s, searching for the lost Franklin expedition, they saw smoke rising from the shore and assumed they were looking at the campfires. Of local people, they were wrong. The cliffs here are full of brown coal and sulfur-rich rock, and when erosion exposes that material to the open air, it spontaneously ignites. No spark, no lightning, just rock that catches fire on. Contact with oxygen. The story goes that when McClure's men carried a piece of the burning rock back to the ship, it scorched a hole straight through a wooden desk. The fires have been smoldering so long that the sulfur dioxide they release has rewritten the chemistry of the land, turning ponds acidic and baking the dark mudstone into stripes of red and orange. There are no roads. The smoke is genuinely toxic to breathe up close. It is a stretch of coast that has simply been burning by itself, since long before anyone was there to write it down. Number 7. In the Crow's Nest Pass of southern Alberta, there is a mountain the Blackfoot and the Tunaxa peoples called the Mountain That Moves. They would not camp near it. In 1901, a coal town called Frank was built directly at its base anyway, and at 4:10 in the morning on April 29, 1903, in roughly 90 seconds, the mountain proved the old name right. Around 80 million tons of limestone sheared off the east face of Turtle Mountain and roared down into the valley at over 100 kilometers an hour. Burying the eastern edge of the town, railway line, and the entrance to the coal mine, somewhere between 70 and 90 people were killed. Only about a dozen bodies were ever recovered. The rest are still under the rock, where they have been for more than a century. 17 miners trapped underground survived by digging their way up and out through the night. From above, you can still see the scar where the mountain tore open, and the vast gray field of shattered limestone, 3 square kilometers of it, with the highway threading right through the middle. The southern edge of Old Frank is kept permanently empty to this day because Turtle Mountain has never stopped moving, and geologists keep more than 80 monitoring stations on its face, waiting for the next time. Number 6. Look at the far north of Labrador into the interior, and you will find a near-circular lake about 28 kilometers across, ringed by cliffs. The Innu call it Kamestistan. On most maps, it is Mististan Lake. Around 36 million years ago, an asteroid struck here so hard that it heated the surrounding rock to over 2,000 degrees Celsius. But the reason this crater belongs on the list is what it is made of. The rock at Mististan is largely a pale stone called anorthosite, and anorthosite is rare on Earth, but it is the dominant rock of the bright highlands of the Moon. It is in effect a piece of lunar landscape sitting in northern Labrador. NASA and the Canadian Space Agency know this. They have flown astronauts out to Mistastan to train among its 80-meter cliffs of impact rock, because it is one of the closest things on this planet to the surface they will walk on next. Getting there from southern Canada takes about 3 days, coincidentally the same time it once took Apollo astronauts to reach the moon itself. Number 5. In September of 2024, a man named Joel Lapointe was doing something millions of us do, scrolling across Google Maps planning a camping trip. He was looking at the Côte Nord region of Quebec, a vast and thinly populated stretch of wilderness about 100 kilometers north of the nearest village. And then he noticed something. A pit. A roughly circular depression about 15 kilometers across, with a curve to its edge that struck him as wrong, too clean, too deliberate. Around a nearby lake called Marcel Lake sat a ring of low mountains. The shape of it nagged at him enough that he did not just scroll past, he contacted scientists. A French geophysicist reviewed the image and said the words that turned a camper's curiosity into a genuine investigation. Looking at the topography, it is very suggestive of impact. Samples from the site were found to contain zircon, a mineral that transforms under the immense pressure of a meteorite strike. The research team now believes Marcel Lake may be the 11th confirmed impact crater in Quebec, a scar left by something that fell out of the sky in the deep past, sat unnoticed for millions of years, and was finally spotted by a man looking for somewhere to pitch a tent. We treat these maps as finished, complete, fully explored. And then someone finds an 8-kilometer ring of mountains that nobody had ever thought to question. Number 4. About 180 kilometers northwest of Ottawa, on the bank of the Ottawa River, there is a site that you can find on a satellite map, but not see clearly. The imagery goes soft and vague exactly where it matters. This is Chalk River. It is one of the oldest nuclear research facilities in the world, and its story begins in 1945, when the project was announced, in plain language, as a plant for producing atomic bomb material. Its main reactor, called NRX, came online 2 years later and was at the time the most powerful research reactor on the planet. But on December 12, 1952, a combination of mechanical failures and human error sent that reactor into a runaway power surge. The fuel overheated and partially melted. Hydrogen explosions tore through the building, lifting the seal of the reactor vessel 4 feet into the air. Around 4.5 million liters of radioactive water flooded the basement, and crews pumped it into shallow trenches not far from the river. It was the first major reactor accident anywhere in the world outside the Soviet Union. Among the hundreds of people who came to help with the cleanup was a young American naval officer named Jimmy Carter, decades before he became president. A second accident followed in 1958. The reactors are long shut down now, and the site is still active in other work. But the blur on the map remains, a quiet acknowledgement that some of what happened on that riverbank was never fully meant for public view. Number 3. Look at the far north again, this time at Devon Island, a landmass in the Canadian Arctic, roughly the size of Croatia. It is the largest uninhabited island on Earth, not sparsely populated, uninhabited. And when you zoom in on its cracked, rust-colored, rock-strewn surface, you will understand why it has earned a nickname: Mars on Earth. The centerpiece is the Houghton crater, about 20 kilometers wide, punched into the ground some 23 million years ago by an asteroid or comet. The cold, the dryness, the bare rock, the total absence of vegetation, it all adds up to the closest thing our planet has to the surface of another world, which is exactly why NASA goes there. Since 1997, scientists have used Devon Island as a Mars analog, testing spacesuits, driving rovers, and rehearsing the isolation of a mission to another planet, all while still technically on Earth. Humans have tried to hold ground here before. There are ancient ruins, an abandoned fur trading post, a long empty police outpost, and the island let none of it last. And here is the detail that makes Devon Island belong on this list. In 2018, Google snit Street View cameras there, so you can now do something genuinely eerie from your couch. You can walk, step by step, across the surface of the most Mars-like place on Earth, through a crater older than the human species, on an island where not one person lives. Number 2. Roughly 500 kilometers west of Yellowknife, in the Mackenzie Mountains of the Northwest Territories, there is a river valley so remote that for most of human history, maps simply left it blank. It is beautiful, limestone canyons with walls 1,000 meters high, a river fed by hidden hot springs. It is also known on official maps by a collection of names that should give anyone pause. Deadman Valley, Headless Creek, the Funeral Range. They call the whole area the Valley of the Headless Men. The names are not decoration. In the early 1900s, during the rushes for northern gold, two brothers, Frank and Willie McLeod, went into the valley searching for a rich claim. They never came back. A search party found them around 1908, reduced to skeletons at their camp. Both skulls were missing. A few years later, a prospector named Martin Jorgensen sent word that he had struck it rich somewhere in the same country. His headless body was found near his cabin, which had burned to the ground. And then it kept happening. Through the following decades, more men, some named, some never identified, turned up dead in the Nahanni, a number of them missing their heads, several beside the ashes of burned cabins. Investigators have offered explanations: bears, starvation, the brutal cold, murder over gold, a landscape that erases evidence and bodies with equal ease. The Dean have older stories still of a people who once lived beyond the canyons and were not to be disturbed. The valley is a protected UNESCO site now, and Parks Canada keeps parts of it closed. You can fly over the Nahanni on a satellite map and trace the green line of that river through the rock. What you cannot do is explain, more than a century later, why so many people followed it in and came back out as legends. Number 1. Our final place is not in the far north's empty distance, and it is not hidden behind a locked gate or a blurred satellite tile. It is in plain sight inside the limits of a city of about 20,000 people. Yellowknife, the capital of the Northwest Territories. On the northern edge of town, right where the houses thin out, you will see the surface scars of an old gold mine. It is called Giant Mine. And underneath it sits one of the most dangerous things in the country. Giant Mine produced gold from 1948 until 2004, more than 50 years of it. But the gold at Giant was locked inside a mineral called arsenopyrite, and to release it, the ore had to be roasted at high heat. That roasting process gave off a fine, colorless, odorless dust, arsenic trioxide, pure poison. In the early years, much of it simply went up the stack and drifted over the land, over the lake, over the town, over the territory of the Yellowknives Dean, whose community sat nearby. In 1951, a Dean child died after eating snow. Over time, the company began capturing the dust and pumping it down into chambers carved into the rock below the mine. And it kept doing that day after day for decades. Today, sealed in the ground beneath Giant Mine, there are roughly 237,000 tons of arsenic trioxide. The figure is hard to hold in your head, so people have tried to put it in scale. It is enough arsenic, if it ever got loose, to kill every human being on the planet. Not once, but several times. Over. When the last owner of the mine went bankrupt in 1999, it walked away from that responsibility, and the cleanup landed on the federal government. The plan they settled on is not removal. No one knows how to safely remove it. The plan is to freeze it, to drive pipes into the bedrock and keep the arsenic permanently, artificially frozen in place, monitored from the surface for as long as anyone can foresee. The full effort is expected to cost more than $4 billion. At the end of 2024, the underground was sealed off. So this is where the countdown ends. Not with a haunted legend, and not with a town the wilderness politely reclaimed, but with a quiet patch of ground at the edge of an ordinary city where the most toxic thing we ever made is being held still by machines that can never be switched off. You can find it on any map. You can zoom right in. And that may be the most unsettling thing of all, that the place we should be most careful of is not hidden from us at all. It is simply waiting, frozen, and trusting us to keep paying attention. Thank you for taking this journey across Canada's strangest corners with me. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone who would appreciate it too, and I will see you in the next video.